I've been thinking a little bit about what it means to be a person. And this comes from some ideas that are a mix of a bunch of misconceptions that I have and some new ideas that I have. Some misconceptions about how the mind works. Hey, by the way, I'm Zachary, and I'm interested in art appreciation. And I think the misconceptions I have are relevant to the nature of art. Okay, the main misconception, I think, is this idea that there is a distinction between logical processing and intuitive processing. And by processing, I mean like thinking, problem solving, that type of thing. I vaguely remember as a kid being both praised and insulted for being logical or overly logical. And I remember also being praised and insulted for being emotional or overly emotional. And at some point, I embraced this idea that logical processing was distinct from emotional processing. From that starting point, again, as a kid, I learned this view. I picked up a view that some people thought that aesthetic processing or artistic processing was distinct from both emotional and logical processing. And this really greatly appealed to me. It led to a much better understanding of certain forms of art that I enjoyed. It's just that both art creation and art appreciation need not be logical or emotional. So you can create art without referencing logic. You can create art without referencing emotions. You can appreciate art without referencing logic. You can appreciate art without referencing emotions. It's helped me understand movies from people like Kubrick, or music from like classical era like Haydn, even some painting or like the work of Kandinsky. And it'd be difficult to understand Kandinsky from a logical perspective or an emotional perspective. So for kind of allowing for this alternative, different type of processing made it much easier for me to understand those works. So like specifically, if we like look at something like 2001 Space Odyssey from Kubrick, there's really not much emotional things going on. Things aren't being sparked emotionally, at least for me. When I watch this movie, I'm not like emotionally engaged. I'm not even logically like, it's not really starting my processes of like trying to figure out something. And it's not like a puzzle or anything like that. The logical mind is not really activated. Neither of those things are happening. And I think that if we were to try to look at 2001 from like a purely emotional lens, something will be missing, like majorly. It will just, you'll be completely off track. Same for music, like the music of Haydn. There's an interplay of contrasting sections and contrasts, but there's not really any emotional content for most of the music. Sometimes there is, but very rarely is there any like emotional content in the music. And of course, it's not logical. I don't even know what it would mean to be logical in a musical sense. And again, for Kandinsky, I like his work. It doesn't seem like there's no like emotional valence to any of his paintings. So that kind of just develops the misconception that I have there, that there's logical processing, and that is separate somehow from various forms of intuitive processing. And those intuitive processings include emotional processing, and it also includes some sort of aesthetic processing or artistic processing, whatever you want to call that. And there's surely way, way more different types. Okay, those are the initial misconceptions that I've had from being a kid up to, recent. Okay, and then we get some more confusion going on here with some more recent understandings that I've developed, specifically something called universal computation, or the idea that people, humans, are universal explainers. So I'm not going to go too much into universal explainers. I'm just going to talk about universal computation and then infer the rest of the way. Universal computation is a very simple idea. It's from Alan Turing. He's a computer guy. And his idea was that there's there's a thing called a universal Turing machine that has the repertoire of all other computers. That means that a a universal Turing machine can do everything that any other computer can do. Really, and also, and really, any physical system can be seen as doing a computation of itself. So we can translate this even further into say something like all possible motions of all possible physical systems, all possible motions of all possible physical systems can be simulated on a universal Turing machine, right? Because a physical system is a computer of itself, it's a computation of itself. So a universal Turing machine can do anything that a computer can do, or any other thing that does computations. It can do that. So a universal Turing machine can simulate any physical process. Simple way of saying it. So this is the basis of modern computation. All modern computers are approximations of the universal Turing machine. In fact, the requirements to be a Turing machine are actually very, very simple. So simple that the human mind has the capacity of a universal Turing machine. What I mean is the mind is a approximation of a universal Turing machine, which means that the human mind can simulate any physical system, the movement of any physical system in the entire universe, meaning that the mind can understand anything that is possible to happen in the universe. And we can do this to any degree of accuracy. You don't have to be 100% accurate. You could do it very, very accurately, arbitrarily accurately. You could also do it inaccurately, which is helpful if you want to approximate things. You can just do it slightly less accurately. So now how does that really interact with the misconceptions that I have here of separate types of processes? Well, first is a revelation of this type of the whole idea of a logical process versus an intuitive process. I don't even know what that means. What is a logical process and how is it different from an intuitive process? And how do you distinguish blah, blah, blah? I don't know. I'm not really sure. So there's a that's being revealed in some way. And is it the case that all step-by-step processes are logical processes? Because I'm thinking of the computer now. And of course, computers work pretty well step by step. Would I consider all logical processes step by step and intuitive processes not to be step by step? And then so could I just say that the logical mind or the logical processings in the mind have the ability to understand everything, but not the intuition? The intuition does not have the ability to understand everything. We get to some area where we have to show independently that emotional processing and aesthetic processing and even just bodily embodiment processing, that type of thing, all independently have the full capacity of a computer. And so each of those independently could universally explain or understand anything that's possible to be understood. We'd have to show that independently for each of those different types of processes. Or the emotions alone don't have the capacity to understand anything. Intuition, any other forms of intuition don't have the capacity to understand anything, and so on. Now, I think I don't really know. Again, I don't know how to show this. I don't really know how to independently determine if each of these types of processes are universal, independently universal. I do think that they are, but again, it doesn't. I don't even know what that means for me to think that they are. The real issue here is taking any of these aspects of the mind independently, because it doesn't really make that much sense. I don't think. I don't know. I don't think it doesn't make that much sense to take the logical aspect of the mind independent from emotional, independent from blah blah blah. But still, there seems to be this difference. There seems to be a difference in emotional processing and logical processing. At the very least, there seems to be a difference in efficiency. When you're processing things with emotions, it's going to be differently efficient than processing things with your body. is going to be differently efficient than processing things, with a thinky mind, step by step, logically. They're all going to have different levels of efficiency for different types of tasks. But that comes to another confusion for me. If they're all universal, which means that you can improve them arbitrarily, you can have arbitrary accuracy. Does that also mean that you can arbitrarily improve the efficiency? I'm not sure, actually. Would it be possible to fully replace the aesthetic mind with the emotional mind? Or would it be possible to replace one aspect of the mind with a different one and keep the accuracy, or keep the efficiency? Or will it always be the case that one type of processing will be faster at some tasks? Will emotional processing always be faster at certain tasks than the logical processing? As an aspect of all of this, the notion of a person or personhood comes up. If the idea to me is if one aspect of the mind is universal, then that means that it could fully simulate a person. So the logical mind is universal. It can simulate a person because a person obviously is a physical process that's happening in the physical world. So you could simulate that fully. And to simulate a person would be just to be a person. So, it doesn't even make sense to use the word simulation in that case. So the logical mind could be a person separate from the totality of the rest of the mind. So this means it's possible to create essentially independent, open-ended knowledge creations systems within a person, like partitions within a person that are independent, separate persons, and in which case, all, uh, if there are any sort of moral considerations that you have for people, those would all apply to this sort of person in a partition of a person. But that kind of that's like a minor thought that was kind of there for a moment, but then I kind of developed a bit further because I don't think that the idea there was that morality applies to people, but really there's something missing with that, and I think that really moral considerations will be applicable to any knowledge creation system. So I'll get into slightly more detail here to clarify that. We can even drop the word morality because I don't really like it so much. But we can start with a basic starting point here that it is essentially irrational to disrupt any process that will solve your problems. So let's say you are a person, a regular person. You have different ways of solving problems within yourself, bodily, emotional, logically. You can write it down on pencil and paper. You can remember, blah, blah, blah. You have different ways of solving any types of problems. It doesn't really matter what type of problem. Any of these things could solve your problems, and it would be irrational to arbitrarily stop yourself from being able to solve a problem. Right? It would be irrational to say, I want to solve a particular problem, but I don't want to use pencil and paper when I solve that problem. You need to have a specific reason for restricting yourself. Do you get what I'm saying here? Like, somebody wants to make a decision about what school they're going to, it would be irrational to say, ignore my emotions when making this decision, or ignore whatever I'm feeling in my body when I make this decision, or ignore what I'm logically thinking when I make this decision. Only pay attention to the emotions. It would be irrational to do that type of thing. Essentially, the idea is that if you have some system that can help you solve problems, it will be irrational to ignore that or to disrupt it, to stop it. And so that's the basics of it. And that continues because you could, for certain systems, understand why something is going wrong or why you're getting a certain answer from your emotions. So you could systematically ignore it for, certain particular reasons, certain narrow ranges of places where you say you want to ignore it. But if you were to determine that it is an open-ended knowledge creation system, meaning that it could solve problems in any way, in ways that you can't even predict, or you could not, ways that are beyond what you have thought were the limitations, then you would never want to systematically disregard any form of knowledge creation. In the same vein that extends to essentially other people, like external to you, if another person can solve your problem, it would be irrational to stop that person from helping you solve that problem because they are an open-ended knowledge creating system. They could solve any problem. So it'd be a problem. It would be irrational for you to disrupt that. Right. So you see how that could form the basis of guiding person's behavior. But if we're starting there, it's not really relevant at all if you're simulating a person. All that matters is that you have various separate, universal, open-ended knowledge creating systems that you have control over. And if you have control over them in any sense, then you would want to preserve it. And I'm saying control doesn't mean that you have full control. I just mean that you could interact with it. Like you could disrupt it. Controlling it meaning you could disrupt it, you could stop it, or you could allow it to continue. If you could stop it, it would be better to allow it to continue. It would be irrational to disrupt any knowledge creation system that could help solve your problems. So for me, that means something like I would not want to stop anybody from correcting any of my ideas. And one way to make sure that I don't stop people from correcting my ideas is to share my ideas and even share my half-formed, half-baked ideas before I even understand what the heck I'm talking about or thinking about. And so that's an introduction to a bunch of random misconceptions that I have rolling around in my mind, not really close to a complete nor a self-contained idea. I don't know, just some things I've been thinking about. I wonder if it would just make I wonder if it would just be cleaner. I wonder if it would be better to just remove this notion of separate logical and emotional or other intuitional aesthetic processes. But still, I can't quite get over this recognition of different types of efficiency. And so there must be some separate types of systems, whether or not I've labeled them properly. There must be some different types of processing. Anyway, I hope this sparks some ideas in you, and I'd like to hear what you think or feel. I was really expecting some good tea here, but it's like it's not strong enough.